Yeah.
Well, in your new book, by the time you read this, you have turned John Cardinal to a very personal kind of case. And this is not a book in which being Canadian or where it is matters nearly so much as who everybody is.
No. I do use the beautiful autumn that you get in northern Ontario, but it's to a kind of poignant effect because it's easily the most beautiful season up there, but it's at the saddest time in Cardinal's life because his wife kills herself in the first chapter, which won't be any surprise to people who have read the first 3 books, or who've read the flap copy, actually, for that matter. So I'm not spoiling anything by saying that, but yeah, it's awful. I mean, she appears to have jumped from the roof of a building, and Cardinal, through a wicked twist, is the one who's called to the scene. He doesn't know it's going to be anyone he knows, let alone his wife. So that's the sad beginning of the story. And it's suffused with his grief all the way through. Even he doesn't question that it's suicide at the beginning, because there's a note in her handwriting, which begins by the time you read this. And he recognizes it as her handwriting. But he does think, how could I not see this coming? I've lived with her and her difficulties for 30 years. How could I not see this coming? The same questions anybody would ask. But it's not really until after the funeral when he gets a vicious sympathy card in which the sympathy part has been crossed out and a really nasty message has been written in its stead, kind of making fun of the fact that his wife has just killed herself, that he begins to think maybe she didn't, maybe this person killed her, and who could that be? So he starts trying to figure out who that would be, but he's totally handicapped, one, by his grief, which throws off his judgment terribly. He makes mistakes, serious mistakes, and two, because the coroner and the pathologist and the other detectives don't find any sign of foul play. There's no case open. So if there's no case open, you can't call up the pathologist and say, can you tell me how this would happen? Or you can't do any of that, because they want to know what's the case number, and that gives them the reason for doing it. Otherwise, it's a misuse of police resources, and that is not kosher. So he has to do this all on the sly and call in favors and get people to help him. He tries to get Lise Delorme to help him, and eventually, it's not really that she ends up helping him, but he ends up being assigned to her case. She's investigating a very different case. It's a child pornography case in which the background of these horrible images looks like it might be Algonquin Bay. These images are sent to her from the Toronto Sex Crimes Unit, which is world famous for being really good at the computer stuff. They send it to her because it's an Algonquin Bay jurisdiction, if indeed it happened up there. So she has to track down this child, but the pictures are old, and she doesn't really know what the child looks like now. The crime scene is a boat or a tent or a hotel. They can't really say where it is, so she has to track this person down. Cardinal, meanwhile, has investigated what he begins to see as a very suspicious number of suicides. And those two cases, him following the depression angle and suicide angle, and her following the child pornography angle, they come together in what I hope is a really interesting and suspenseful way towards the end of the book.
I think it is. Actually, I think, that there are all kinds of reasons to like your books, and I have, as you know, loved them all. I think this one has the most emotional resonance. There's a real sadness to it because of the personal connection, and of course, the obstacles that you point out make it harder for him. So if loyalty is one of the qualities that you most admire, this is a book, I think, in which loyalties are really brought to the fore and tested, even loyalties to someone who's dead. And that's, it's an interesting question about what the detective owes the victims, to the dead. So, I think it's a tremendously moving book.
Oh, great.
And it's nice, too, that if you're writing a group of books about the same characters, and now that each book can in fact have a different kind of emotional impact, whether it comes from the weather or whether it comes from grief over something in the past or whatever.
Yeah, to me that's the main interest of the book. I'm interested by crimes, obviously, and the psychology of villains, but to me the emotional stuff, the psychological stuff is the main interest. for me.
Well, you managed to achieve, I think, both a great investigation and a lot of emotional resonance in this book, which I think is really hard to do. And regrettably, you're not going to believe this because you flinched coming in when I said we were going to talk for an hour. We just ran out of time. So I wish we could go on, but I hope you'll come back and see me again.
I'd love to.
Thank you, Giles, very much.
Thanks for having me.
And I certainly thank all of you for joining us on this episode.